In this video, we're going to show you to install control arm bushings on your Toyota Tundra located in your lower front control arms. Using a 21mm socket, let's loosen and remove our lug nuts. Now that you have your lug nuts removed, grab that wheel, remove it, and set it aside. Now we want to go ahead and separate our outer tie rod here from the knuckle. Before we do this here, I'm going to go to the opposite side of the vehicle. It is raised and supported. I'm going to grab that wheel and just go ahead and crank that out. That's going to give us better access to that cotter pin and nut. Now we're going to go ahead and try and remove our cotter pin here. Our vehicle is pretty rusted, and part of our cotter pin here is, well, pretty much part of the nut itself. So just using a pair of cutters here, and ideally most cases once you bend the tabs down even on the other side, you can grab this side here with the cutters, pinch gently and kind of rock it out. But like I said, ours is pretty much well rusted. It's just crumbling apart. So our next option here is to go ahead and just cut the two legs off, and we're going to tap a socket onto this here and spin that off. And we're able to get out one of the cotter pin legs there. Go for that other one. There's the other side. We use our 18mm socket. I'm just going to tap this on. And we're tapping this on because our nut is pretty much rusted pretty bad. So we're going to tap that on, try and zip that off. Lightly spray this down with some rust penetrant and let that soak. Now after you've let this soak for a little bit, I'm going to go ahead and use our hammer and strike the knuckle right here. That should release our tie rod. Make sure you're wearing safety glasses when doing this job because metal and rust can fly off of this. Using a 22mm socket, let's go ahead and loosen this nut here. Now we're using a 19mm with a swivel head ratchet. I'm going to go up above this portion of the rack. We want to loosen and remove this bolt here. Got to remove that bolt. Remove the nut and the washer. On the right hand side here we have our clamp with a 19mm nut. We did go ahead and heat this up a little bit. We want to loosen this one, and we're going to repeat the same process for the bolt up top. Now we're going to use a pry bar between the frame and the steering rack. We're going to gently pry this out a little bit. I'm going to work both sides. Now we're going to separate our sway bar end link from the control arm. Our particular sway bar end link nut is an 18mm. And we're just going to thread the nut back on here for now. Using a 19mm socket, we want to loosen and remove the nut on the lower portion of our strut assembly. Now our whole bolt is spinning right through, so we're going to go ahead and put a wrench on the inside to hold that. And we're using an 18mm wrench on that bolt side. Go ahead and remove the bolt, set that aside. I'm going to use a pry bar to come on underneath here between the strut and the control arm. And just make sure that they're free. And you can see that they're separating freely of each other. So we have the long bolt that comes through our cross member here and into our steering rack. We're going to go ahead and loosen and remove that. We're going to use a 22mm socket on our swivel. We're just going to use our punch on the other side. Once that comes through, we should be able to move our steering rack up a little bit. This will allow us to pull our steering rack back and get better access to the bolt side on our cam. So we have our 22mm socket on our ratchet here. And what we're going to do is we're going to periodically apply some heat to the nut side over here. And while we're doing this, that should help loosen things up. Now that we've got our bolt loose, we can work this out. We have this bolt out. Let's go ahead and move to the forward bolt. Now we're removing our forward bolt here. Now this is a 22 as well. Now you want to take note that the forward bolt goes in from the front. The rearward bolt comes in from the rear. The rearward bolt is also a different length than the front one. The back bolt is shorter. Now this cam right here does come out towards the front of the vehicle, so this cam is part of the sleeve, and then the back half is a nut with a cam that should pop right off. So we're going to work on this here using our air chisel. Make sure you're wearing safety glasses when doing this. Our cam happened to pop off separate from that sleeve. It should have been part of it, but it came off. At this point, we're going to go ahead and work on the other side, but this sleeve itself needs to be pushed through or pulled out in order for us to get this control arm out. So if we can't do that, we're going to have to either torch this or cut it out somehow so that we can get that control arm pulled out from the frame itself. So we went ahead and used a yellow crayon to mark where the bolt goes through, and we have the wider part of the cam over here. When we install our new components, that's going to give us a preliminary setting for our alignment. Let's go ahead and see if we can separate this here. We're going to do the same on the other side here. on the bottom of our control arm here. It goes into the ball joint onto the knuckle. Now there's a cotter pin in place here. You want to go ahead and use your pliers and try and get this removed. Ours is pretty much just crumbling apart. In most cases, if these are just crumbling apart, they're not going to present much resistance if we just put a large socket on this here with our impact gun and blast it off. But it's always good to try and get it out. So we're just going to go ahead and install a socket here with our impact and blast that off. Using a 24mm socket, we're going to go ahead and loosen and remove this lower ball joint nut. You also want to pay attention to securing that control arm. Now at this point you can see that we have the nut down but it's not off. I'm now going to use a hammer. I'm going to strike the control arm here to separate it from the ball joint. Make sure you're wearing safety glasses when doing a job like this. You can see that the control arm dropped down. It is now separated. So now you want to support this control arm, remove the nut, lower it down, and remove the control arm. Now here we have our lower control arm in our bench vise. And here is our new bushing, one of the two that we're going to be installing. And this is positioned in here like so. So there is a lip here. We're going to use our air chisel and come around the perimeter, pushing this in and working it inward, and we're going to kind of roll the metal in, and then we're going to punch that out through the control arm. This is the same process that we're going to do for the other side as well. So let's go ahead and get started. Make sure you're wearing safety glasses and ear protection if you are using air tools like this here. Slowly work your way around the perimeter. And what we're doing is we're rolling that metal in away from the control arm itself and working that inward. You may have to reposition the control arm a couple times to make sure you get a good angle on that. So on our particular unit here, we had to heat this up and burn the bushing out of it. We'll go ahead and properly dispose of this. Now with the bushing out, we just have the metal sleeve left in there. There is a hole on the side of the control arm here. We're going to use a punch to go ahead and roll some of that metal in. Here it comes. What we're simply going to do is going to use our little cookie here to go ahead and clean up the metal around it, and then we're going to follow it up with a cleaning disc. I'm going to go ahead and clean the inside of the control arm where the bushing is going to go. I want to take out any of that rust that's built up in there. our control arm is ready for us to press in our new bushing. I want to go ahead and install our bushing here. Now this side here requires the larger, wider bushing. It goes in. The other side is going to be a shorter bushing, so be careful when you're installing. Make sure you get the right one in place. I'm going to go ahead and get our tool and power this right in. You want to make sure this is a good tight fit. We had to transition over to a cup that was the same diameter or a little bit larger than the control arm itself. That's going to allow for our bushing to come through. I'm going to back this off a little bit. It feels like I'm bottomed out. All right, we have just a little bit more to go. So we're going to push this in just a tiny bit more. And once this is in, we're going to go ahead and repeat for the other side. We're going to use a punch, or you can use something to drive the old cotter pin out here. We just have to get it to come out enough so we can grab it with the pliers and pull it up the rest of the way. In worst case, we run a small drill bit through the center just to chase it. So we're going to go ahead and drill this out. Now that we got the cotter pin out, we went ahead and cleaned up the threads. We put a little bit of anti-seize compound on here. And we're going to slide this up and on and get this nut started. So we went ahead and coated everything in our anti-seize compound as well as our bolts and sleeves. Now at this point here, we do have this coated and want to work this in. And it might take a little persuasion, possibly with a pry bar or something. But our cam itself faces up. We have the bolt down here. We had marked it previously with our crayon. So this needs to go up pretty much at about 11 o'clock, between 10 and 11 for a preliminary alignment spec. And our other cam on the back is going to be set up the same. So we'll have to take a pry bar and slide this over and get this cam into the tabs. But we're going to put the rearward cam and bolt in over here. Just use our pry bar. Here we go. Now we're going to use our pry bar between the control arm and the frame. We can go ahead and slide this out. And once we get that somewhat lined up, here we go. We're going to do the same for the back, make sure that lines up. Now our back bolt is the shorter bolt. Just wiggle that around that boot for that steering rack. Okay. right, now that we have this bolt and nut installed, I'm going to go ahead and repeat for the rear. Now I'm just going to go ahead and snug these down gently. I'm not going to torque them in place yet. Now what I'm doing is I'm just snugging this gently, making sure that both of the cams on front and back here are inside of the tabs. I'm going to go ahead and do the same for the back. Snug down our lower ball joint nut. Let's torque down the ball joint nut to 103 foot-pounds. Now at this point, I want to go ahead and locate the hole for the cotter pin. If it's not lining up, you want to go ahead and continue to tighten this nut until the hole lines up with the next notch. Never loosen this nut to line that up. Now our hole lines up, and take our cotter pin. Take one of our tabs, fold it down underneath, tap that up nice and tight, snip off the excess, and that ball joint is all set. In order for us to go ahead and get our strut assembly lined up with our control arm, we're going to use a jack underneath the control arm here. Going to raise this up a little bit, get that to line up. We did go ahead and clean up the threads on our bolt. Let's go ahead and install the nut. Now I had thrown our nut back on for our Swivel end link. You want to go ahead and locate that if you didn't do that. Let's go ahead and raise up our control arm here. And that might help you get that sway bar in there. Use our 18mm socket and zip that down. Torque down your end link to 51 foot-pounds. Now, for any reason, if the stud here is spinning with the nut, you have an option to use a wrench or a claw foot on your torque wrench with an Allen key on the backside, or you can use the pliers on the inside while you tighten the nut. Now at this point here, we're going to use our jack and we're going to raise up our suspension to a neutral ride height, or the ride height of the vehicle. So what we're going to do is raise this up until the vehicle just starts to come off of our lift, and we're going to go ahead and torque down our strut, and then we're going to transition to the inboard control arm bolts, and we're going to torque those. Let's torque down our bolt to 100 foot-pounds. Go ahead and torque down our control arm bolts to 96 foot-pounds. Now that we're torqued into place, let's go ahead and remove the jack. Slowly lower that down back onto your stands. Now we're going to install our horizontal bolt through the frame here, and it's going to come out into the rack. Now we did clean up that bolt and put some anti-seize compound on it. move that rack back and over. And if that rack is slid just a little bit, it should be able to slide back over. Go ahead and install the washer. Before installing this here, you definitely want to go ahead and clean the threads, and then clean the threads here as well. That's going to help this line up and thread right in a lot easier. Now you want to make sure that the hole is lining up with the rack, so you can look up inside here with your light. If not, either this side of the rack is pulled out or the passenger side is pulled out. Make sure both sides of the rack are seated. We went ahead and cleaned up our bolt. Let's go ahead and feed that up from the top. Now we have our center bolt lined up, but it's just not threading in yet. We're gonna go ahead and transition over to our nut here. We're gonna snug this down as well as the passenger side. Let's go ahead and snug down this bolt. Now with that rack pulled in with all of the hardware, the center bolt lines right up. All right, let's go ahead and snug this down. Let's go ahead and torque down these two clamp bolts to 123 foot-pounds. Now you want to go ahead, and if you have the ability to do so, you want to go ahead and torque the center bolt here to 123. Once you're done with that, transition over to this here. This large nut here is going to be torqued to 96 foot-pounds. Go ahead and line up the tie rod end with the knuckle. You might have to push the stud left or right, whatever it is, to get that line to line up. Push that up and in. Now you want to pay attention to the position of the hole on the ball joint stud, because that's where you're going to have to put your cotter pin in. Install that castle nut, thread that down. Go ahead and tighten this down. And then we want to snug it down to 67 foot-pounds. Now at this point here, we're trying to install our cotter pin, but the hole itself is not lining up with the notch in the castle nut. So if that is not lining up and you can't get the cotter pin in, continue to tighten this nut until the next notch lines up. Never loosen this nut in order to fit the cotter pin. Install the cotter pin. And on the other side, you're going to take one of the tabs. You're going to pull up on it and bend it over the top of the stud. I like to tap it with the pliers here, and you can kind of roll it over. If it's not that long, that's totally fine. If you have excess, go ahead and use the cutters to snip that off, and then snip off that extra leg on the back. Take your wheel, line it up. Let's go ahead and install our lug nuts. Once we get all these started, we're going to go ahead and snug them down. torque down your lug nuts to 83 foot-pounds. We're going to do this in a crisscross pattern.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.